We're going to now continue the story along with social science. And our next session is She Blinded Me with Neuroscience. And our speaker is someone who's going to introduce to you sort of the idea of how neuroscience applies to marketing, innovation, as well as just organizational evolution. So would you please help me welcome in a very I'm a wide awake fashion, Donna Sturgess, who's the president of Buyology.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, post-lunch afternoon. I'm excited to talk about cool today because I have been fascinated by cool really for a number of years because of the emotional heat that cool can put into a business. And if you think about this conference, the emotional heat that cool adds to social, that makes messages move, that makes content so interesting that you just want to share it with people. But cool is also an elusive concept. And I think if I went around the room and asked any of you to give me a definition of cool, they would really vary. And some of you would also struggle to put into words what you mean by cool. It's tied to culture, it's something that's really exciting, but it is an elusive concept, and actually it has an unstable definition, which is part of the reason I'm so interested in doing the work that we've been doing. So if you think about why that is in terms of the excitement around cool and why we don't have the opportunity to manage it, much of it comes down to how you manage it. And so one of the things that I've been involved with is creating tools that operate below the level of rational thinking where we believe cool is actually processed, that it is not part of our rational thoughts. It's tied to perception, intuition. We actually have a reflexive kind of response when we go, oh, that's so cool, right? Just think about your own behavior. You know it when you see it. It's intuitive. It's reflexive. And as science has advanced, we've had the ability to bring tools, he mentioned out of the social sciences, into business. And that's really what excites me about taking learning out of science and applying it to business to crack open insights and start to make information visible that hasn't been visible before. And so just think about the lenses that you use to look at your business, because what you see affects how you change. And that's what's so exciting to me about this content, that you begin to see things that you cannot normally see by walking up to somebody and saying, tell me what you think is cool. This is actually operating at a lower level. And so I just brought this example. Think about before there was radar. It's probably 1930s radar came along, but commercial flights, even what were considered commercial flights, were happening in the early 20s. Now, there weren't that many planes out there, and they had to fly pretty low. But think about how this has made information visible. Same is true of the net. Conversations used to evaporate into the air by phone, in person, and now conversations are concrete, and they're being retained, and they're recorded through the internet. And so the power of how science and technology have come together to make information visible is a bit of a backdrop to this presentation today. So just in highlight form, what I want to share with you is this is information you would not find otherwise through a simple survey. I'm really interested in insights. You know, we all go to too many focus groups hoping someone will say something insightful. I was really interested in building tools that would start to bring insights to business that we're not hearing direct from the consumer. We also want to work with large sample size and do that in a methodology that allows consumers to be making choices, not passive methods, which are also available in a lot of neuroscience techniques, where we can scan people and record things, but they're not actually involved in a choice. And we were interested in making sure choice is part of the equation. So as we've looked around the scientific literature and what's been published around cool, there's not really that much. And yet, as you see this quote from the University of Rochester Medical Center, cool is pervasive. It seems to be creeping into an awful lot of things we do, whether it's cultural or otherwise. And if you don't subscribe to Bazaar, this is a cover that only goes to subscribers. Doesn't have all the cover lines that they have to have at newsstand. They're working with very cool images of people in order to create the kind of engagement and excitement. I see someone nodding their head, so they must be a subscriber. And you recognize when you have the opportunity to really talk to the people that matter, cool's important. She's hot. And lots of brands have visions of cool. This is just one that we pulled for Heineken out of the Milan Design Fair, where they had people involved in what would be the next generation nightclub, what's cool clubbing. And certainly you've heard in the news recently that Heineken has paid, I think, well over $40 million for rights in the James Bond movie to be the beer. You know, the guy who's shaken, not stirred, is now going to have a beer, and it's going to be Heineken. Because tying to those cultural components and things that are really contemporary and hot in culture can make a difference in a business. But here's another product that I've researched, and I'm interested in this because this is so antithetical to what you would think about cool. This is a product that does extremely well in the kind of testing that we do because they defy category conventions. They've really stepped out and thought about what would be cool for women. I remember a number of years ago being in the UK and seeing a white sanitary napkin package with a bright red stiletto on it. I mean, that was sort of saying, this is for women, and why are we in these very hospital kind of packages? And I think this brand has done a marvelous job bringing color that you would never typically bring into that category and doing some exciting things because they know that cool matters. So here's a couple of things that we've learned about cool just to share with you today. One of the most important, as you think about how you're driving business value, is cool has a profound impact on brand favorability. We've been studying this across many categories ranging from chocolate to technology to cosmetics and so on. And the impact of cool on brand favorability, if you take nothing else out of this conversation and meeting today, that's the one thing I'd like you to take home, is the profound impact it has on brand favorability. Cool also matters to everybody. It's just a question of what they think is cool that's different. We see older people having a different brand affinity or content affinity to cool than maybe their younger family members or other people in the young cohorts like millennials. It matters to them. And the thing I'm going to share with you in a case that I brought today is cool has different characteristics for different brands. So if you think about, you want to unpack cool, if you're going to measure it so you can manage it, you want to unpack it in a way that you can actually begin to understand what's driving cool on this brand versus another brand. And then I've already covered that you need to be measuring below the level of conscious awareness if you want to understand perception and intuition impacts on cool. So I thought we would share a study done in the US on beer. Beer seems like a pretty typical thing for people to think about cool. And later on, I'll show you some blinded results from another study just to broaden the perspective a little bit. We had 525 people in this study, and you can see the ages and the gender splits up there. And then I've also broken out a little bit around millennials, just because once you get the data, you just begin to peel back what's happening on cool around a variety of different people in the study. So these are the beer brands that we put in. You find your favorite beer there? We obviously did not include all the craft beers, and there could be a very long list of beers that we include. But anybody have a shout out around the beer you think that won? Guinness. Coors? Sam Adams? Well, we have a nice mix of people drinking different beers here. You sure of your choice? Wow, wow is right. And I'll talk a little bit about why we think Corona is at the top of that list, but I heard somebody say Guinness, Sam Adams. You know, look at Sam Adams, it has 2% of the beer business. It's punching above its weight. Look at the big spenders in beer and where they are on the list. And when we unpack that from different groups, we see these brands move around. But this is total sample looking at who's cool among these top 9. When we look at millennials in particular, but also because they found Corona to be #1, but among everyone else, when you talk to people about why Corona, you get summertime, beaches. Some people even rationalize that the lime is on there because it's citrus in summer, which we all know is not where that came from. But people now begin to pack into here, why cool for Corona? And it seems to have some exceptional things going on around its brand. And I have noticed that they also do things around beaches and protecting beaches around the world. And so they are beginning to figure out where cool and its traction is coming from in their business. But look at this. We did a study among spirits, separate from the beer study, and Absolut beats Corona. Now, when I saw this, I was not all that surprised because I think of Absolute and the way they run that business and how they focus on cool. But just to dimensionalize, compared to Corona, Absolute is significantly cooler. These are the characteristics that we've unpacked around cool. And over time, as we've been studying more and more of this, some things have been on the list and taken off because we don't see them driving real difference. So we continue to hone this list around what it is that people find to be cool after they've given us kind of that total score. And here what you see is Corona versus Heineken. What I like about this particular study that we haven't seen in some of the others is attractive is important for both of them. And it's also important across a number of other beers in the study. And maybe that's a category effect. Maybe in beer, that's part of what you've got to get done in the category to do well. And the separations begin on the characteristics below that. And so you see surprising for Corona. This was unique in the beer study in terms of this brand offering surprise. And surprise is very important in terms of how we import things into memory. We tag memories around things like surprise because it punctures our consciousness. We go along our day doing what we're doing, something that surprises us stops for a minute, maybe a nanosecond, and we reappraise and integrate that into what we think about something. So that's a very important dimension, even though it's ranked lower down on the list. We were intrigued to find surprising working on this particular brand. Now, if we peel this back a little bit and look at young men, 18 to 29 versus young women, 18 to 29, on their top 5 characteristics, look what we see. So there are differences in terms of what women think is cool, what men think is cool, and we always unpack that on cool around the brands that we're testing because we do find real gender differences in terms of how people are attracted to a brand or a communication or a website or what have you based on these kinds of characteristics. And again, once you understand what these are, and you're looking at your competitors and saying, how are mine different than theirs? Where do they have advantage? What are the numeric strengths of their scores versus my scores? You begin to see what you're working with and start to manage that in a way you may not be managing it now. And that includes things like this. So I pulled these because they're seasonal. We're all here in October, close to Halloween. You know, an awful lot of time and effort and money is spent projecting cool in this category out into the world through these kinds of communications. Imagine if they understood how these are considered cool relative to their brand equity. Where is it a match? Where is it a mismatch? Where's the strength coming from this kind of a communication to build the characteristics that you want and maybe the characteristics that you don't want because you think that's not the brand you're trying to drive. So again, you know, for all of us in the room, that information is power and we begin to be able to manage against it. This is just to give you a quick snapshot of the Explorer that we build when we do work like this so that we're able to, you know, add a lot of different questions in there, sometimes curiosities, other times things we're really looking to understand about cool, and so we can simply pull that information and peel that back relative to what we're looking at. So this is one where we looked at the states. So we pulled up California and New York and said, what are the differences East Coast versus West Coast around millennials? How do they feel about beer? Look at Bud Light in New York. Go figure. Wouldn't have been the first thing I would have thought of. But Guinness is certainly very cool considered in California versus New York. Maybe your regional efforts and things that you're doing would matter in one side of the country versus another or one country versus another. And this one we just asked for fun because we know that McDonald's sells beer outside the US. And if you were going to sell beer, McDonald's, in the United States, what beer do people want you to sell? Corona. Interesting. This is another study that we've done on cool just to give you a feel for a little broader context of 3 other brands in terms of their cool scores of brand number 1 versus brand number 3, and then, you know, the numeric values according to where people rank these around these dimensions. And remember, I'm doing this non-consciously. I'm not sitting there contemplating, gee, do I think brand number 3 is more attractive versus brand number 1. These are answers that people are recruited in milliseconds. And so just to give you a little bit of background in terms of the testing, now that I've gone through the results, my work and the work of the team in Buyology is all about rigorously understanding the non-conscious drivers of demand. I mean, our name really says, you know, why do people buy what they buy? What are those pieces of motivation that can be triggered that get people to focus on your business and drive competitive advantage. So when we think about the non-conscious, what's down in there that we should care about? And I'm sure everyone in this room knows things like your memories and values are filters, and they affect and influence the things that you buy. A lot of people are interested in this work because it dials up, the emotion and the desire. How do I make a stronger emotional connection? Well, you've got to start to understand this space because we're not out shopping and acting rationally all of the time. Intuition is a strong lever related to cool, but intuition in and of itself, and why we've put the Apple phone there as an image, is because you intuitively react to it. The haptics of that, holding that in your hand and interacting with it, is something you don't have to sit and think about or read instructions to operate, which would be your conscious thinking operating there. And then finally, cool, because we are beginning to see how much impact that's having on brand favorability. And I share this quote from Daniel Kahneman just because I think if you haven't read his book Fast and Slow and you want more information in this kind of a space, his book is a good read, as is Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, which was written a number of years ago. But I think it really sums up nicely that emotion and perception are formed in the non-conscious, which is more influential than your experience tells you. Just because you can't feel it happening doesn't mean it isn't happening. And it is the silent author of the choices that many people are making, even though what we explain in those focus groups and in other research is my rational alibi. We spend a lot of time looking at the physiologic effect. Where does reward activate in the brain? And many parts of what we do in our business is looking at those sciences and methodologies. However, the test that I shared with you was actually conducted on a laptop. We've built the analytics into a laptop so that people can, through a forced choice model, go through the test to quantify their reactions to cool. And so I just leave you with this thought. It's about quantifying so that you can not only measure but also manage. Where are you putting emotional heat into your business? How are you really making it worth sharing, worth sending along, worth being involved with? And then defining those characteristics as a tool. We've been defined forever as humans by our tools. As our tools advance, so does our thinking, whether we go back to the radar example or all the way back to the hammer. And so I think it's just something that's worth your time to understand the non-conscious space a little bit and think about how it might impact your business and improve the relationship you have with customers. Thank you.